The wind rolled low across the plains, bending the tall grass in waves that shimmered under the pale moon. A storm was building somewhere beyond the ridge, whispering its warning through the skeletal branches of cottonwoods. Evelyn pulled her thin shawl tighter, shivering as the cold crept into her bones. Her boots were soaked through, the hem of her dress heavy with dust and rain. She had been walking for hours, guided by nothing but the dim light of the rising storm and a stubborn will not to collapse. Behind her lay nothing, no home, no kin, no safety. The small cabin she had once shared with her brother was now an empty shell, its hearth gone cold. He had been her protector, her only family left after the fever took their parents. But when the letter came, stained with the dust of the trail, telling her he had fallen in the mines, her world had collapsed into silence. The landlord wasted no time throwing her out, and the townsfolk, tight-lipped and wary of taking in another mouth, offered nothing but pity and distance. So she walked. She didn't know where she was going, only that staying in that town would mean starving, or worse. Somewhere ahead, she had heard, there were ranches scattered through the valley, places where work could be found, where a woman might earn her keep. But the plains were not kind after sunset. Every rustle of grass sounded like danger, every coyote's cry tore through the empty dark like a knife. Her throat burned from thirst, her stomach twisted with hunger. When she tripped on a rock and fell to her knees, she pressed her hands to the earth and whispered hoarsely, "Please, God, I just need somewhere safe." When she lifted her head again, she saw it, faint, flickering through the gloom, a light. A lantern swaying in the wind, hanging from the porch of a cabin no more than 100 yards away. For a moment she thought it must be a trick of exhaustion. But when lightning flared across the horizon, she saw the outline of the cabin clearly, solid and real. Her body moved before her mind could catch up. One staggering step, then another, until she was climbing the slight rise, the light growing brighter. Her breath came ragged, her hands trembling as she reached the door. She hesitated only a second, fear whispering that whoever lived there might turn her away, or worse. But the storm cracked above her, thunder rolling like the growl of something ancient, and she knocked. Inside, Caleb heard it between the groans of the wind and the hiss of the fire. He had been sitting alone, nursing a cup of coffee gone cold, lost in the soft crackle of the logs. The ranch had been quiet for months now, ever since his wife had passed that cruel winter. He had thought the silence would bring peace, but it only made the house feel emptier. The fire was his only company, the rhythmic ticking of the clock his only sound. When the knock came again, louder, more desperate, he frowned and rose from his chair. Folks didn't come calling this late, not out here. Grabbing the lantern from its hook, he crossed the floor and pulled open the door. The sight that met him froze him in place. A young woman stood there, half soaked, her hair clinging to her face, eyes wide and glistening in the lamplight. She looked ready to collapse, her lips pale, her breath visible in the cold air. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely carrying over the wind. "Please don't leave me outside." Caleb didn't ask questions. He stepped aside and caught her just as her knees gave out, his strong arms lifting her effortlessly. "Easy," he murmured, closing the door with his boot. "You're safe now." He laid her near the fire, pulling a blanket from the nearby chair and wrapping it around her shoulders. She shivered violently, teeth chattering, eyes darting around the cabin as though afraid it might vanish. He crouched beside her. "You been walking long?" She nodded weakly. "Since morning," she whispered. "They said there were ranches this way. I didn't think it'd be so far." Caleb poured her a cup of warm coffee, adding a spoon of sugar before handing it to her. She took it with shaking hands, sipping slowly as color began to return to her cheeks. "You're alone out here?" he asked after a moment. Her eyes glistened again. "My brother's gone. The town didn't want me there no more." Caleb's jaw tightened. He knew what that kind of loss felt like. He'd buried his wife under the old oak behind the barn, the same oak she used to sit under when the sun was too strong. He'd sworn he wouldn't open that door in his heart again, not for anyone. But something in the girl's voice, that mix of fear and strength, cracked something inside him. He sat back, staring into the fire. "You don't have to go anywhere tonight," he said finally. "You can rest here till morning." Her eyes lifted to his, uncertain. "I can't pay you," she said softly. "Not yet. Didn't ask for pay," he replied. "Just don't freeze to death on my floor." That made her almost smile, a fragile, fleeting thing. She pulled the blanket tighter and leaned closer to the fire, letting its warmth seep into her bones. The shadows danced over her face, softening her features. Caleb found himself studying her in the silence that followed, the curve of her jaw, the sadness behind her eyes, the small hands clutching the mug like it was the only warmth left in the world. Outside, the storm broke fully, rain hammering the roof, wind howling through the cracks. The sound filled the small cabin, but for the first time in months, it didn't sound so lonely. Evelyn sat quietly, her eyes half closed, listening to the storm's fury fade against the steady crackle of the fire. When her voice came again, it was small, trembling. "I'm sorry to trouble you. I couldn't stand being alone tonight." Caleb didn't answer right away. He reached for his coat, the old brown one hanging by the door, the one he'd worn through every hard season, and draped it gently around her shoulders. "There," he said quietly. "You won't be cold no more." Evelyn blinked up at him, her eyes shining with tears she hadn't meant to shed. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. He nodded once, sitting back down beside the fire. "Get some rest. I'll keep the fire going." For a while, she just sat there, watching him through half-lidded eyes as the warmth spread through her body. Then, as the thunder rolled further away, she whispered again, her voice thick with exhaustion and something deeper, "Don't leave me alone tonight." Caleb looked into the flames, the light flickering across his face, and for the first time in a long time, he answered softly, "I won't." Morning came slow and golden over the plains, the kind that stretched wide and endless, whispering secrets only the wind knew. The storm had passed, leaving behind a fresh, quiet world. Dew glimmered on the grass, the scent of wet earth and pine drifted through the cracks in the window, and inside the cabin, the faint crackle of the dying fire was the only sound. Evelyn stirred beneath the heavy blanket, the one that smelled faintly of smoke and leather, his coat, she realized, when she pressed her face against it. It was rough, worn, but it held a warmth she hadn't known in years. For a few seconds, she didn't move. She just listened. Somewhere outside, a horse whinnied, and boots thudded softly on the porch. The sound of the world starting again. When she opened her eyes, the cabin looked softer in the daylight. The fire had burned low, but sunlight now filled the gaps where shadows had lingered. The wooden walls, lined with tools, rope, and shelves of tin cans, told stories of a man who lived simply, honestly. The chair near the hearth was empty, but his hat still hung on the hook, tilted the same way it had been last night. She sat up slowly, feeling the ache in her legs, the stiffness in her shoulders. Her body was exhausted, but the fear that had lived in her chest for days had quieted, replaced by something calmer. When the door creaked open, she turned quickly, her hands clutching the blanket. Caleb stepped inside, his broad frame filling the doorway. The light behind him made him look taller, but his face, weathered, serious, kind in its own way, softened when he saw she was awake. He carried a bucket of water in one hand, his other arm balancing a small loaf of bread wrapped in cloth. "Morning," he said simply, setting the bucket down. "Morning," she echoed, her voice still soft from sleep. "You made it through the night." She gave a small, shaky smile. "Thanks to you," he shrugged, pulling off his gloves. "Storm's cleared. Thought you might want to wash up. I'll get breakfast started." Before she could protest, he moved to the small stove by the wall, setting a pan on the heat. His motions were quiet, practiced, a man who'd done this alone too long. He poured water into a pot, added a few spoonfuls of coffee grounds, and soon the air filled with that rich, comforting smell. Evelyn watched him for a moment, unsure what to say. She'd met men who were kind for what they wanted, men who helped with eyes that took as much as they gave. But Caleb wasn't like that. He didn't look at her the way others had. His silence was different, not cold, just cautious. She rose and limped slightly to the window, her bare feet light on the wooden floor. Outside, the ranch spread wide, fences half mended, a barn leaning slightly to one side, a horse grazing by the creek. It was beautiful in its loneliness. He noticed the limp when she turned back. "You hurt yourself." "Just tired," she said quickly. "Walked too long yesterday." He didn't press her. Instead, he nodded toward a chair. "Sit down. You'll eat better that way." She hesitated, then obeyed, lowering herself onto the chair as he handed her a tin plate with bread and fried eggs. Steam curled up between them, and the smell made her realize how hungry she truly was. "You didn't have to," she began. "I know," he said, cutting her off gently. "Eat anyway." The words came out rough, but there was kindness beneath them, the sort that doesn't need to be spoken twice. She ate in small bites, the food simple but filling. Every few moments, she caught him glancing at her, not out of curiosity, but as if making sure she didn't fade away right there. After a while, she said softly, "You live here alone?" He nodded, taking a sip of coffee. Wasn't always that way. She didn't ask more. The weight behind those words told her enough. Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Outside, the wind moved through the grass, the kind of sound that could lull a weary heart. Evelyn felt something strange stir in her chest. Gratitude, yes, but something deeper too. Something that scared her a little. Caleb leaned back in his chair, eyes on the window. "You got somewhere to go?" Her fork stilled. "No," she said finally. "I was hoping, maybe someone out here needed help. I can cook, mend, keep house. I don't need much." He studied her for a moment. "Most ranches don't hire women alone." "I figured," she said with a small shrug, trying to hide the hurt in her voice. He looked down at his coffee, swirling it slowly. "But I could use help around here. If you want to stay for a spell." Her head lifted. "Truly," he nodded. "Once. Long as you're willing to work. I ain't much company, but I won't turn away someone trying to stand on their own." Her throat tightened. For the first time in weeks, she felt seen, not pitied, not judged, but seen. "Thank you," she whispered. "I won't be trouble." Caleb's gaze softened. "Didn't say you were." As the morning wore on, she helped wash the dishes while he fixed a broken board on the porch. The rhythm of work filled the air, the scrape of metal, the murmur of water, the occasional creak of floorboards. They didn't talk much, but words weren't needed. When the sun climbed higher, Evelyn stepped out onto the porch. Caleb was there, hammer in hand, his sleeves rolled up, sweat shining faintly on his tanned skin. He looked up when he heard her footsteps. "You sure you should be walking on that ankle?" he asked, frowning slightly. She smiled faintly. "I've walked through worse." Something in her tone, quiet, resilient, made him set the hammer down. He stepped closer, his boots stirring the dust. For a moment, neither spoke. The wind played with her hair, lifting a few loose strands, and she tucked them behind her ear, eyes lowering. "Evelyn," he said softly, "you don't owe me anything. You can stay as long as you need. But don't think you're just some burden I picked up on the road." Her eyes flicked to his, glistening. "I didn't think I was. But I've been treated like one before." He nodded slowly, then reached up, unbuttoning his coat. "It's cold again tonight," he said, draping it over her shoulders the way he had last night. "Keep this till morning." She clutched the fabric close, the warmth of it seeping into her. "You'll catch cold." He half smiled. "Been colder before." The sky above them deepened into shades of rose and gold as the sun slipped lower. For the first time in months, Evelyn didn't dread the night. She stood beside him on the porch, the scent of pine and rain still lingering, the silence between them soft and full. When she finally spoke, it was barely more than a whisper. "Thank you, Caleb, for everything." He looked out toward the horizon, his voice low and steady. "You don't have to thank me. Just, don't leave me sitting here alone every evening."